Why were civil society organizations and the Fees Must Fall movement the subject of questionable spying activities by the State Security Agency? Greenpeace Africa, Right2Know and Right2Protest have released the declassified Boast Report from the Zondo Commission into state capture. It was penned by a member of the SSA Special Operations Unit to then Director-General Arthur Fraser. The report provides insight into the activities of 14 SSA operatives referred to as co-workers during the period of the 1st of January 2016 to the 24th of February 2017. To share their concerns and what they plan to do about this, I'm joined by Melita Steele, Interim Program Director for Greenpeace Africa, based in Johannesburg, Bongani Mthembu from Right2Know's National Working Group, and Omhle Ntshingila, the Engagement and Communications Officer from the Right2Protest. Good evening and welcome to you all. Melita, I'll kick off with you. The report makes for troubling reading, but it also lives up to its name, Boast, because it boasts about its accomplishments, even concluding with the note that the operatives actually exceeded expectations. How did you feel reading that?
Thanks, Iman. It's incredibly troubling, and I think we know the Zondo Commission has laid bare the level of state capture and corruption that has happened over the last decade. But to know that we are civil society organizations working in the public interest, really seeking to create a positive change and future for South Africa, and that operatives have, without a clear indication of any real threat, infiltrated our organizations. And now we're trying to find out exactly what the extent of the infiltration was, but we don't know what the extent was. The names of people haven't been released. It's deeply, deeply troubling.
We'll come back actually to accountability a little bit later and what you do in the aftermath of a report like this. But Omhle, this is a direct infringement on the right of organizations like yourselves, on their right to protest. And in fact, the entire NGO sector should be concerned. Why is this act so heinous in a democracy, according to you?
Well, Iman, for us, it's pretty straightforward because we are sitting with government apparatus that do not respect the Constitution and wish to undermine not only just the individual rights of citizens, but the rights and the operations, undermining the rights and the operations of CSOs in our country. This is a direct threat, not only to the CSOs that have been mentioned in the reports, but have been experiencing this arbitrary spying on their organizations, but a direct threat and attack on activism in this country. And it really just goes to show how much the civic space in South Africa is beginning to shrink year by year.
Bongani, I want to bring you in just to share with some of our viewers who have not seen that report, who don't understand the extent to which it goes, and we'll raise some other key elements insofar as the presidency and advice that the president was given around the time of Marikana. But I want to ask you just to share, some of the troubling tenets of the work that these operatives did in your space and, of course, in the Fees Must Fall movement.
Yeah, precisely, because thanks, comrade. No, the thing is, we've been having a serious trouble with engaging on the ground with our own forces, with our own comrades, because now there's this mistrust amongst ourselves, and this because we don't know who's who, we don't know who's here, we came with agendas and interests that are very much dubious. So it has given us some very, very uncomfortable space in our own interest of promoting a social justice and continue to fight for what belongs to our people. It has given us some serious negative thoughts amongst ourselves as activities because it really disrupt our own programs, disrupt our own principles of taking the issues that are fundamentally important on the ground, taking them forward, including the Fees Must Fall, because even them, their struggle it's no longer the same because of this. It has hampered their own moral fiber, even though we are trying to regenerate that kind of activist fiber and
Right.
continue to but what belongs to the people on the ground.
Melita, let me loop it back to you. The troubling thing, I imagine, for you and all who worry about this type of invasion and overreach is that you don't know the full story. It's not a very long report that we were presented to, but effectively it shows how effective those who had infiltrated organizations like yours and the Fees Must Fall movement to be able to get information, to understand where certain things were taking place and what actions might ensue, and that information was then rallied back to their handlers. How far can you go? Of course, you have sent a letter to the presidency, and this was more than a year ago or so, if I'm correct. Yes, just over a year ago. You haven't heard anything back. How can you get answers in this environment?
Well, Iman, in reality, a transparent, honest, accountable government would not be threatened by the actions of a healthy civil society. And we have been forced to take a number of actions to try and gain some clarity. The letter to the president was one. We've written to the Inspector General. We've put in PIA requests. At the end of last year, we put in new PIA requests to the State Security Agency, which were denied. And so we've actually just filed new legal papers to request that denial is actually reviewed. So we're taking every step possible that we can to try and get as much detail as possible. The release of the Boast Report is an important moment, which we were able to achieve through the Zondo Commission. But the level of clarity around the infiltration of civil society is very, very low. It was one page in the Zondo Commission's hundreds of pages. And we simply are really, really struggling to find out who actually did the infiltration and whether there has been any remedial action at all, especially when we're organizations fighting for social and environmental justice in the country.
And maybe, Omhle, that question to you and Bongani, do you trust the people you work with? Are you convinced that all those operatives have left and that you are not still being watched?
No, to be honest with you, we are not trust, because even though we've started to do our own internal audit of who's who in the zoo, but we are not safe. We don't feel comfortable yet that we still believe that these infiltrators are still within ourselves, because we think the DG of the State Security Department should declassify these names of these people who deployed to dismantle our organization, to spy on us, and so on. So until that such a time, we know who's who did this, and so on. Then we'll be able to comfortably trust each other and be able to work in the collective like before, and be able to move with our own programs as normal.
Omhle, what do you expect from the president insofar as the damning recommendations of the Zondo report into the SSA and this Boast report in particular?
Iman, I think with the Zondo reports are now finally finalized, I think it's up. It's not really up, but it's really something the president should look into doing. As Melita has mentioned, in reviewing the PIA request, making sure that information about the arbitrary spying is available to the organizations that are concerned within the Boast reports. And it should be a priority for the president to rebuild a stronger, healthy relationship with civil society organizations in the country, and for there to actually remove doubt of the government when it comes to our space within the democratic space of South Africa and the political arena at large. It is our role to be present in civil society as not only just those who are looking into social issues, but to keep the government accountable. It's our right to express express ourselves and our concerns and our dissent about government in the way that we do. And it should never be a moment where government sees CSOs, as Melita has mentioned, as threats. So I really am expecting the president to look into the prior reports and to the reviewing of it and the access of information to all CSOs that are involved.
You know, the reality is that spying on NGOs is not new to us. We can reflect back in 2015. The UK monitoring agency was keeping a local NGO under unlawful surveillance, the Legal Resources Centre. The Sunday Times that same year reporting on illegal surveillance of 5 NGOs, which the then spokesperson for the SSA was quick to shoot down as misinformation, saying that people have recourse if it's found that it was happening to them. But it does seem, based on what we're hearing now, that the SSA still operates with impunity. What are your specific concerns about the SSA now, Melita?
Iman, I mean, I would add, you know, Earthlife Africa, Greenpeace Africa, and Groundwork were also spied upon by Eskom. So, you know, the levels are quite serious in South Africa. Ultimately, the State Security Agency needs to be reformed. And the only way that it can be reformed is if there is real accountability, real transparency. The perception of civil society as something negative within our democracy is really troubling and ultimately needs to shift. The high-level panel report that was released in 2019 makes very clear recommendations about what needs to change in the State Security Agency, what needs to be reformed. And until those recommendations are fully implemented, until those responsible are held accountable, we're going to be in this space where organizations that are acting in the public interest, that are fighting for social and environmental justice, may or may not be spied upon. And we simply don't believe that that is acceptable in our constitutional democracy.
Bongani, I'm so sorry to throw in a South African meme, but it sounds like the SSA has been operating like a spaza shop. You know, it's being run, you know, under the radar. I mean, you know, and again, pardon that analogy, because that's really where they sit. You know, they sit in the shadows, in the darkness, and it's all under the cover of, you know, making us feel safe. But when you look at this, and also concerningly, you know, I know we're focusing on what happens in your sector and organizations there as well. That first act that was recorded in the Boast Report, the deliberate misinformation provided to the president to prevent him from traveling to Marikana, gives a view of how this instrument can be used, you know, with a particular agenda in mind. And I'd like your commentary on that, Bongani.
Precisely, because remember, as long as we are not interpreting the Constitution and respecting the way it requires us to do our things, as Section 16 of freedom of expression, Section 18 of freedom of association, I think those are fundamental rights that we need to also to stick with. Another thing, it's really embarrassing. The whole state security sector, it's so much embarked on this dirtiness of how they operate things, but they are failing to protect their own citizens with reasonable, because the very same resources that are being used there are the resources that need to be sort of misdirected to things that will be able to benefit the whole country, and not to be subjected to people who are promoting the pillars of democracy and people who stand to assist and go out and assist the very same citizens that is protected with the Constitution. So as long as we still have that kind of attitude towards those institutions, we are not going anywhere. But those things must be corrected by the president and the very same department, DG. We think those are the officials that will be able to stop this whole fiasco of nonsense. Thanks.
Thank you for talking to us, Melita, Omhle and Bongani, reflecting on the now declassified Boast Report.